Morning. Obviously, I'm back from the Fool's Loop, back at home. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, my GoPro mount broke on day 4 on the Black Canyon Trail. That was just a rough trail. I also broke a retainer for a drop-down bar that was intended to kind of push stuff away from my cables. The aluminum just snapped. I'll post a picture up there of that. But Black Canyon Trail was just a super rough trail. Be really fun on an unloaded mountain bike with full suspension, but fully loaded on a rigid gravel bike, it was a rough ride. I also hit a rock strike, bent an aluminum rim. I took a rock to it and kind of pounded it back into shape, and then somebody stopped and helped me with some pliers to get it back into position. But you know, that wheel was damaged. I didn't really trust it. For day 5, leaving from Black Canyon City, I decided not to go any further on the Black Canyon Trail. My goal was to get back to my car relatively quickly, but I did want to avoid the freeway. So I looked on Google Maps on my phone and also looked on my Garmin Edge 1030 to map out a route to get back using some of the gravel roads that were adjacent to the freeway. It looked like there was a couple ways, or one way to get through. The morning of day 5, I loaded that up on my Garmin Edge 1030 Plus and started following the direction that it told me to go down Mini Mine Road, I believe. I went down Mini Mine Road for a couple miles. I don't remember exactly how far it was, but at some point the guidance wanted me to go up an arroyo, which is a dry wash bed, and that just didn't feel right. I mean, there was a fairly decently traveled road that I was on, so I decided to go straight. And shortly after that turn, I came up on a wall. The road went up almost straight up this hill. It had to have been at least 30% grade. So I turned around and I went back down to that arroyo and started riding down it. And I only got it maybe half a mile or so and came across this sign, which says that no trespassing and that there are cameras. There's a second sign that said cameras are in use. So that was not open to the public. So I turned back around, went back to the main road, got to that hill, and pushed my bike up the hill. It took a little while. It wasn't a huge hill. It wasn't terribly long, maybe a quarter mile. But yeah, it was hard to get up to the top of that. So I went over the hill, and on the other side of that, the road split. It was like a Y, and if I went to the right, there was another set of those signs saying no trespassing and cameras in use. So that was out. So then I rode forward, maybe 500 yards or so, and came across a gate with another set of signs that said it was no trespassing and cameras in use. So the road that I was on was not open to the public. I don't know why Garmin sent me that way. I backed it up by looking at Google Maps, and it also sent me that way. But that was not an open course. So I was next to the freeway. There was a pretty big embankment to get up, and I had to lift my bike over a fence. And then, I think about the Tour Divide Wall. That's the kind of hill it was. It was very steep. It was more dragging my bike up than rolling it. But I did get to the top of that, put my bike on the other side of the guardrail. And then I took I-17 down to Anthem, which is a town outside of the Phoenix Valley. Got off the freeway there, got back on the course that my Garmin Edge had provided for me, and it kind of zigzagged its way back to where my car was. Along the way, I had to stop many, many times to fill that rear tire because air was still leaking out of it. In hindsight, it was probably a puncture that I just never looked for. I just assumed that it was coming from the bent part of the rim. I probably should have put a tube in, but I was kind of lazy, I guess. And to be honest, the bike has a pinion and gates belt drive, and I had never taken off the rear wheel, so that's bad on me. I should have practiced that before I left. I was concerned about maybe messing with the tension on the belt, but it turns out that it's a pretty simple process to take that wheel off. I've done it several times since, and I did buy a belt tensioning check tool to verify that the tension is correct after taking the wheel off and putting it back on. I should have stopped and just threw a tube in, but instead I probably stopped every Well, it actually wasn't very consistent. Sometimes it would last for 5 miles. The tire would stay pressurized, and other times it would be a mile. I'd have to stop and re-air it up. So it made for some slow going to get back to my car but eventually I made it there without any real problems. Made for a quick ride. All that pavement between I-17 and all the paved roads going back to where my car was parked. I am glad that I did not go down the Black Canyon Trail, especially with the tire, losing pressure so much. So that was a good decision. So I did finish a loop. I just didn't finish the Fool's Loop. The last day was definitely a alternative, if you want to call it that. So once I got back to my car, I unloaded the bike, packed up the car, and then drove back up the hill. I mean, there's nothing really to say about that. In terms of the Fool's Loop, it is a challenging course. It's beautiful, rugged country. If you're looking for a challenge, Fool's Loop will definitely do it for you. If you go out when it's expected to be warm, make sure you bring extra water. I didn't expect it to be as warm as it was, especially in February. There was still snow on the ground where I lived. Once you get out into the deep desert, it gets pretty warm during the day and gets cold at night, so be prepared for both. So part of the reason that I went on this ride was to kind of assess my new co-motion and decide what changes I need to make. So the first big one for me was swapping out the aluminum Velocity cliffhanger rims with a set of carbon rims. Prior to the Fool's Loop, I've never had a problem with carbon rims. They've held up really well for me. So I trust them on long rides. Aluminum, I've had the aluminum tear at the eyelets. I've had rims bend. They just haven't been as reliable for me. And part of my goal is to have a very reliable bike. The second thing that I decided that I need to change is the gear ratio. Some of those climbs were just too hard. I was pushing too many watts to get up them. It felt harder than my Niner. I think that the gear ratio on the co-motion is actually higher than the Niners. I'm going to change the sprockets on the outside to give myself a little bit better climbing gear, my granny gear, make it a little bit easier. And then the last thing, of course, is the cockpit. I wasn't really very happy with how the Fred bar pushed the elbow pads too far back. So I think if I just get a set of pads and raise them straight up off of the Jones bar and then go back to the Jones Narwhal single arrow bar, that'll give me the position that I'm looking for. Should be fairly comfortable. I may raise it up about an inch, maybe 1.5 inches off of the handlebars just to, give me a little bit more comfortable cruising position. Yeah, in terms of figuring out what I need to do to the bike, this was a great trip. I learned a lot about the bike. I learned a lot about my fitness level and what I need to do to improve on both. I did camp 2 nights, and I think that my camping setup is fairly well dialed in. I didn't really change a lot from my normal bikepacking setup. Everything worked really well. It is a heavy load, so I'll probably, depending on the trip that I'm going on, I may change up what I take along, but I had no issues with camping along the route. The second night when I was out on top of that hill was nice with the stream that I could refill water at. So I hope you enjoyed the series. This was my first time videoing myself. I think I learned quite a bit about, the microphones. I apologize for some of the muffled audio during this. I think I should have had the camera on more than I did, because it's fairly easy after the ride to, edit what makes sense. So I'm learning quite a bit. This was a good experience for me personally. I appreciate everybody who watched, and I appreciate everybody who subscribed. Thank you very much for the support. Going forward, I kind of went backwards in terms of my Tour Divide training, and this was really the first bikepacking event that I did prior to the 2022 Tour Divide. So going forward, we're going to move more into a forward direction with an overnighter that I did, and then Fitzgerald's Joyride in September. So I do have more content coming up. So if you're liking this, please subscribe, hit that like button, and hope to see you again on the next video. Thanks so much.